The Last of Us Part 2 begins with a promise, an acknowledgement and awareness of past misgivings, and the resolve to atone for those sins, even if it takes the rest of one's life to do so. The horse ride back to Jackson at the beginning of the game is a bridge between the broken, confused, and angry Joel Miller of the past and the hopeful, responsible, more loving Joel of the future. He is unbroken, the name of the track composed by Gustavo Santaolalla playing over this moment. It's an evolution of The Path, the track the previous game ended with. This is an evolution of Joel's promise. And the reason Joel is unbroken, what has forced the light in Joel to shine through and shine outward, is Ellie. No matter how dubious Joel's actions regarding Ellie have been up to this point, two things are fundamentally clear. He loves Ellie with all of his heart, and that there's not a thing in the world he wouldn't do for her. If Joel ever were to lose her, he would surely lose himself. This is Joel's promise to Ellie, played on the strings of his greatest gift to her, a gift that will eventually connect Joel and Ellie through time. When Ellie plays this song, it becomes her promise to Joel, especially when Joel's promises become bucked by disaster. We naturally confide in the characters we play as, even if we know very little about them. And that's exactly why Joel's death is a monstrously shocking betrayal, because we trusted Abby too much. Joel trusted Abby too much. This is the price of being a loving man in a world like The Last of Us. There is no room for empathy, growth, or redemption, just wolves killing sheep. And not only does that become Ellie's horrifying lesson to bear, but also her curse to bestow on others, to perpetuate the cycle of revenge, violence, and destruction. And most importantly, Naughty Dog puts it in our hands. Every single aspect of Seattle, from the first day to the last, is conceived with extremely careful detail. How your first approach of the city takes you along a dilapidated highway, before cratering in at the mouth of the city, where you then have to cross a wall, then a series of gates. This is the crossing the threshold moment in every hero's journey, except it has a distinctively Jurassic Park twist. These walls aren't stopping us from conquering the special world, they're stopping the special world from conquering us. And though this may seem like a hero's journey, it will quickly turn into a tragic hero's fall. The first area of Seattle is wide open and begs to be explored. A mostly blue sky shines down on our troubled young protagonists as they banter back and forth about their dreams, the lives they want, and the memories they have. So much hope and sincerity pours out of Ellie and Dina that it's difficult to see how they could ever be corrupted by the same venom that consumed Joel's killers, or at one point, Joel himself. But soon enough, once the killing starts and names are crossed off the list, a shift begins to take place. The areas our journey takes us through begin to shrink in width and become more focused and narrow. The sky begins to turn gray, and the expectant Naughty Dog banter between Ellie and Dina becomes more one-sided, and more concerned for Ellie's intentions. The more they're put through, the more outdone they seem by the increasingly apparent scale and ambition of their quest. This is not what they were in for. But where Dina wavers, Ellie becomes aggressively determined. Remember the man who took you to the museum. It might have been the happiest day of my life. I can't let that man die for nothing. After day 1, you, the player, might think you understand the height of Ellie's task, but day 2 will push you to the brink. The environments become more congested and puzzles harder to solve. Wolves start appearing in greater numbers and enact increasingly more lethal tactics of killing you. At the same time, the game's scavenging and upgrade system encourages you to improve your weapons, craft trip mines, smoke bombs, become faster and quieter in stealth, and transform into an effective killing machine. The game wants you to crawl on your elbows through the seedy trenches of disheveled neighborhoods, muddy swamps, decaying office spaces. The thundering drones of Mac Quayle's music reverberates through your skull, crushing you with waves and waves of numb anguish. Everything about this experience is designed to simulate Ellie's inner turmoil, not so that we confide in it, but so we can feel it. We need to grasp, as tangibly as a game's design can emulate, the feeling of pain. There is no comfort in arm's reach, not even the flashback sequences, which expose Ellie's growing distance and distrust of Joel. All we can do is use that pain as a weapon, to cut, bleed, and destroy the world standing in front of us, all the way to Nora. So far in this experience, Naughty Dog has repeatedly encouraged us to step out of our comfort zone into Ellie's world of destruction. And as discomforting as that has been, nothing has been so unbearable as the simple button presses needed to torture Nora. She's going to die anyway, and more so, her defense for killing Joel isn't easy to disagree with. But it doesn't matter. This quest isn't driven by logic or understanding. Few missions are motivated by such things in a world so cruel as The Last of Us. This quest is driven by emotion, by infuriating numbness, by pain. And it's not over yet. By day 3, Ellie has fully adopted Seattle's all-consuming darkness. The level design is treacherous, forcing you to scale up and down collapsed chunks of road, swim through narrow tunnels, and eventually use a boat to navigate dangerous rapids. The entire trek to the aquarium is met with heavy rain, and though the banter between Ellie and Jesse is initially more lighthearted and welcoming, it feels wrong. It contrasts disturbingly well with the moment Jesse parts ways with us, and suddenly we're back on our own. Somehow, surprisingly, we now rest in comfortable isolation as Ellie. The wolves and infected in our path become an afterthought as the aquarium starts to become the only thing that matters. This isn't about justice anymore, and it's more than just pain. It's obsession. Naughty Dog puts every last ounce of resistance between you and your goal. The waves that kick you off your boat, every locked door in the aquarium, the attack dog. We need to be faced with all of it to feel the desperation of Ellie's obsession. And then finally, that obsession takes us not to Abby, but to Owen and Mel. Ellie becomes the very thing her path of obsession has led her toward, a wolf-killing sheep, initially indifferent to the cost of lives before her, only acting out of sole interest. As a result, in all of her destruction, she's also begun to destroy herself. What more could Ellie lose from this? Jesse, Tommy, Dina? Does it matter whether or not she's truly avenging Joel, so much as she fulfills the destructive needs of her obsession? Because when it seems like it possibly couldn't get worse, it does.
We let you both live, and you wasted it! Dad? Dad? Dad!
And then this happens?
Come on.
After spending the last 10 to 15 hours sinking deeper and deeper into Ellie's world of pain, first losing, then slowly regaining resonance with her motives, Naughty Dog rather abruptly asks us to play as Joel's killer. Even after killing dozens of WLF and infected, being forced into engaging in Ellie's morally ambiguous actions, and wallowing in the perpetual despair of Seattle, this somehow makes us far more uncomfortable than anything we've experienced up to this moment. And that's precisely the point. We're just like Jesse or Dina, supporting Ellie's horrific actions so long as we can excuse our discomfort with willful ignorance. Yet, when it comes to sympathizing with the enemy, no matter their reason, we draw the line there. And besides, we trusted Abby once before. We're not trusting her again. That's when Neil Druckmann, his hand firmly on the pencil of this moment, shows us a truth we probably never considered. Joel killed Abby's father.
Dad! Dad! No! No!
Using our experience with Ellie and the cycle of her vengeance, we're quickly able to apply that to Abby, creating an instantaneous bridge back to the moment of Joel's death, now from Abby's perspective. But through Laura Bailey's performance, we find no resolution nor satisfying expression on Abby's face. We can't tell exactly what she feels, but it's definitely not what she expected to feel. This is not only where Abby's story truly begins, it's where the real story of The Last of Us Part 2 begins. From here, we're sent all the way back to day 1 of Seattle, again. We roam the halls and rooms of the Wolf's base of operations, probably a former Seahawks stadium. There's people lifting weights, eating lunch in the cafeteria, chatting about movies and girls, fresh food stalls and dogs you can play catch with. There's even a freaking kindergarten classroom. All of these people have normal names, live ordinary lives in the stadium, and seem nothing at all like the people we spent hours running from as Ellie. This isn't at all what we expect from the Wolves, but it's also exactly what we'd expect. Of course they're normal people, and the dogs here are lovable, and everyone has healthy relationships and has interesting hobbies. Because we see what you're trying to do here, Naughty Dog. You want us to feel bad for how many of these people's lives we probably ruined over the last 3 days as Ellie, but you also never gave us a choice in whether or not we could ruin them. Why should we feel bad for these people now? This is the resounding internal dialogue of every player who gets to this part of the game. But once again, that's the point. We resist sympathizing with the perceived enemy, or the other. We don't like seeing nor understanding the relatable cracks in their humanity, and how that might lead them to take actions we understand. For the player, that still applies against Abby. Yet, we keep playing as her because we're curious. On some deeper level, beneath the cognitive dissonance of our loyalty to Joel and Ellie, we want to confide in Abby, even if we won't admit it. And so we follow her. Through Abby's scathing remarks about the fanatical scars, her messy, unrequited romantic history with Owen, and her desperate efforts to survive, we follow Abby to the bitter, unsatisfying end of day one, waiting for our curiosity to be fulfilled. Eventually, it does. What initially reads as an out-of-the-blue sex scene is really the perfect response to both Abby's and our own cognitive dissonance. How much of her identity has Abby given up to pursue revenge? Certainly not just her connection to Owen, but also the vulnerable exterior she once had in common with him, and the compassionate interior her father modeled for her, something her guilt-ridden nightmares seem to confirm. This is ultimately a confession of weakness, and the first of its kind in the game. That the violent, apathetic, and brutal forces that run the world don't have to run us. We can be more than that. We can be individuals. That begins with the rescue of Yara and Lev, the other of Abby's world. There's nothing about these two scars that deem them more worth saving than the rest, only that the very act of saving them is all that matters. Your trek out to the sky bridges is an awkward, unassuming confrontation with the cause Lev roots himself in. There's a clash between the loving ideals the Seraphites stand for, and the violence twisted from those ideals. Much like the violence the ordinary wolves are capable of, or even Ellie and her friends from Jackson. There's an important commonality there, but it has yet to be completely driven home. Up to this point, Abby has hardly wavered in her unbreakable demeanor. But from the morning of day 2 onward, we only get to see more and more of her gaping vulnerabilities, and probably never more so than when she has to cross the sky bridge.
Holy shit, Lev! It's gonna be okay. Eyes on me. Shit.
Matt Quayle's music blasting across the stratosphere, the sound design of the wind and the gentle creaking of the pipes and plywood we step on, or even the sense of agency felt by the player over Abby's balance put the feeling of sharp knives in our wrists and ushers forth an utterly amazing realization. We care about Abby. And it's for that reason that when Abby's worst fear comes true, we're all willing to admit that we want Abby to redeem herself. From that moment onward, The Last of Us Part 2 becomes The Last of Us Part 1, a story of unlikely redemption through learning compassion.
Those were your fucking people. You're my people.
Abby's redemption takes us to utter gameplay extremes, between the Rat King underneath the hospital, the figurative high-level boss island on day 3, and several of the most unrelenting combat encounters in the game. And though the path to one's descent is met with a self-destructive price, the path out of darkness can be equally treacherous. Protecting Yara and Lev requires us to kill the people they once called family, just as the wolves were once ours. And the sole reason we understand that is because of Abby's day 1. It was never about guilting the player over the people they killed as Ellie. It was about understanding who the wolves are to Abby, and just exactly what she'll be giving up in defiance of them. We do the same for the Seraphites. Even though we'll continue to kill them to protect Yara and Lev, their deaths have never come less lightly. And thus, Day 3 of Abby's story is a day of sacrifice. The sacrifice of Abby and Lev's friends and families, our loyalty to factions, and both Abby's and our own egos. This is the price of choosing empathy in an apathetic world, and we will pay it to the bloody end. The escape from the island feels like a historic event in multimedia unto itself. This is a terrifying display of hateful, dark emotions driving forth egregious violence. We know both of these factions are capable of showing love and understanding for the people around them, and yet so many lives go to waste in the name of a campaign of pure destruction. We humans are capable of horrifying atrocities in the name of benevolent causes. And even in a world where working together to survive has rarely been more important in the history of humanity, we only end up repeating these mistakes over and over and over again. Second to it all, Abby and Lev must escape with their lives. It's a savage escape, but it takes us out of darkness. Until we remember what happened 10 hours ago. This is the price of being a loving woman in a world like The Last of Us. Vengeful thoughts rush back to Abby like poison. The cruel forces that once compelled her guide her once again. We play our way back to the theater where the swap first happened, and then we have to kill Ellie. Holy fuck. As hazardous as it might be to ask the player to kill the protagonist, it totally works, and largely because we now know the full story. Ellie is the villain of Abby's story, and this is her boss fight. Matt Quayle's thundering drones return with force. The tactics encouraged to take down Ellie are cunning and aggressive, as are the cutscenes in between phases of the fight, as both these characters cut, bruise, stab, and hurl each other into objects. This is no longer about choosing a side. You, the player, know this after the island. It's only about feeling the raw confusion of pain, and how it possesses us to do dark, horrible things to one another. It truly takes a loving voice
Abby!
to calm our frustration. After 20 brutal hours of gameplay in Seattle, both our protagonists and the player deserve a break. That takes us to the farm, where Ellie and Dina are raising Jesse's child. The Naughty Dog house, as we'll refer to it, has been a staple of now the last 3 Naughty Dog games, using characters' homes as a vital storytelling device. It was our first introduction to Joel in The Last of Us Part 1, and our farewell to him in Part 2. The home of Ellie and Dina feels similarly like a farewell, and very much the same way the home at the end of Uncharted 4 was a farewell to the characters and adventures we had experienced for 4 games. And though this house reflects who Ellie and Dina are and the lives they want to live, it's eerily hollow. This is the logical endpoint to Ellie's journey, but not the emotional one. Still, maybe it could... And there it is. The obsession, the trauma, the horrifying, inescapable past. The hate that once drove Ellie corroded to its very base element, fear. And so, after everything Ellie has been through, it may never be enough to simply bury the hatchet. Obsession wreaks tidal waves like an all-consuming destructive force. The more time Ellie spends on this farm, the more it erodes her happiness, her security, her trust, and eventually, her love. Every reason she's had to live here is undone by the obsession of avenging Joel. All of it is in vain, even her relationship to Dina. We know absolutely none of this is true, but we also understand why Ellie thinks otherwise. Her journal becomes littered with drawings of moths, the symbol on Joel's guitar, his gift to her, and the promises she played on it in turn. The promises can't be for nothing. Joel can't have died for nothing. It's time for one last act of destruction. Santa Barbara is quite literally the polar opposite of Jackson. Our journey began in the figurative heaven of the Last of Us world, but now it ends in hell. But Ellie is no stranger to this chaos, and in some ways, the concentration of deep, festering anger and lethal hatred boiling within her is far more potent than anything this place can throw at her. For most players, this is the most violent stretch of the game. Explosive arrows, trip mines, gunfights, and blood. All of it to leave annihilation in Ellie's wake as she makes her way to the beach with the darkest of intentions. But then there's a moment of hesitation. The boy Abby is determined to protect. That was her to Joel. Is Abby really so different from me? Is she so different from Joel? The answer doesn't matter. This is a confession of pain. The pounding drones, the chunks of flesh and blood pouring from our protagonists. This is a horror movie, and we're playing the horror. We can resist the pain all we want, but it's always going to end the same way, in destruction. Finally, it consumes us. Ellie spends every last token of her soul on this moment, a final act of destruction. And just when our worst fears for Ellie and Abby are on the verge of coming to fruition, Joel saves us. Why give up on revenge when we've come this far? Why, in spite of the lives we've destroyed, the friends we've lost, or the mistakes we've made? Why let it all go to waste now? For if Ellie kills Abby, she'll waste her most precious opportunity to understand Joel. A patient, loving man who saved Ellie not because of his own selfish wants, but because of his selfless love for her. An entirely new dimension to Joel that recontextualizes this entire story. Ellie has spent this entire game trying to forgive Joel, trying to understand what greater purpose he believed she had, and the ensuing confusion and doubt Ellie feels over that. Would Joel not want her to avenge his memory, to ensure that the sacrifice he made for her did not go in vain? Is this not a good cause, inspired by a miraculously good person? And did the tragedy that befell Joel, the tragedy this whole quest spawned from, not rob Ellie of her ability to forgive him in the first place? This is the confusion that encircles Ellie, and it's only at the moment in which understanding Joel has never been more at stake that she finally finds clarity. It all comes down to the lesson Joel learned for himself in The Last of Us 1, and Abby earlier in this game. It's about love. Not only the love Ellie can receive, but the love she can give the world. That's her purpose. Ellie may not know Abby like we do, and sparing her life after nearly killing her is far from what anyone would call love. But the very decision to spare Abby, to let go of one's ego in a moment of superiority, is to finally accept and understand that Abby is not so different from her, a conviction that can only root itself in a place of empathy. More and more often, not just gamers, but audiences and consumers of all types of art and media want the feeling of finishing a game, seeing the credits burst onto the screen, and going, wow, that was a great game. Or alternatively, they might expect the ending they've received to move them to tears, to then let the beauty of the experience wash over them. The Last of Us Part 2 is certainly both a great game and a beautiful experience, but watching the ending unfold all the way until the credits pop does not give you that feeling. In fact, the ending feels particularly numb, but deliberately so. It's impossible not to feel the crushing weight of this experience, a game where the protagonist goes from having it all to losing pretty much everything by the end. The loss is handled so realistically that it's difficult to even find the appropriate emotion to react to the ending. The track by Gustavo Santaolalla that first plays over the credits is fittingly named Beyond Desolation. If there was ever a describable emotion one could muster for this ending, it's probably that. Taking the entirety of my own experience with the game into account, through every beat I've covered from Joel to Ellie to Abby, it was hard not to succumb to the sheer emptiness of the game's ending. I knew this was ultimately a story about love, and the challenge we humans face both when we're deprived of it and when we try to give it. I also knew it was about obsession and factionalism, and the extent to which both of these forces can lead us to do horrible things. But what I didn't know was why. Why did Neil Druckmann, Haley Gross, and Naughty Dog feel the story needed to be told in the way it was told? This was the question at the forefront of my mind amidst the emptiness of the game's ending. Beneath that emptiness, something about the game resonated with me very personally, and I needed to find out what it was, why it was. Almost immediately after beating The Last of Us Part 2, I started my second playthrough. Not only did I want to re-experience the game's best moments, but my goal was ultimately to learn more about the game. I started taking notes, which a video game has never made me do before. I scoured the world for every collectible, every line of optional dialogue, every nuance in the animation I might have missed. Eventually, to both my delight and my surprise, multitudes of the game started opening up to me, a series of startling revelations in a game already filled with rich thematic meaning. And through those multitudes, the smattering of collectible notes paralleling, contrasting, or refracting the experiences of the characters, the complete connections between Ellie and Abby's parts of the game, and the numerous decisions made over the deliberate characterization of the game's cast, I found answers to nearly all of my questions. The best way to explore those answers is to frame them around an entirely new question. Why are these games called The Last of Us? In other words, who is The Last of Us? Being that this is the apocalypse, The Last of Us could very well be the last of mankind. This would be the story of the last humans to walk the earth. While that would be a chilling sentiment, I think it's a bit too broad and somewhat nihilistic against what these two games are really about. So maybe The Last of Us is a bit more specific, a demographic or subset of mankind, a generation. But which generation? It's probably either Ellie's generation, people who were born after the apocalypse, or it could be Joel's generation, people born before the apocalypse. Given the sharp focus on the old in the first game, and then the very clear focus on the young in the second game, it seems equally likely it's both. But having reflected on the meaning of not just Part 2, but also Part 1, I can say with absolute confidence that The Last of Us refers to Joel's generation. And here's why. The apocalypse of these games doesn't merely result from an unfortunate stroke of circumstances. Rather, the world of The Last of Us is a byproduct of humanity's failures. An inevitable, thoroughly fucked reality that resulted from a series of bad decisions mounted by human vice and the resounding shrug of a hopeless generation. The disaster that befalls Joel, Tess, Bill, Henry, Tommy, or any other survivor from the first game is not an event, it's their new reality. And not only will they be forced to endure it, but the responsibility of ensuring that humanity somehow goes on falls firmly on their tired shoulders. The responsibility of not only teaching them how to survive this new, hostile reality, but to learn from the sins of the Father, to create lasting change, and unfuck the world that will so unjustly be given to them. In the first game, your mission is just that. Where Joel becomes a standout in a generation of apathetic adults, Ellie comes to represent the next generation, the literal and symbolic hope for mankind's future. Her immunity gives the Fireflies hope for creating a cure, but because she was born after the onset of this post-apocalyptic world, she will one day inherit the responsibility of fixing it. It's an enormous undertaking, and that's a vital part of what makes your journey in the first game so compelling. You are passing on what you've learned to the next generation, and against all odds and practically God himself, protecting it with every fiber of your being, no matter who says otherwise. All of this culminates in a final decision where Joel all but wipes the Fireflies off the face of the earth just to rescue Ellie.
Please. You just come after her.
In the Sunset of Part 1, and through much of Part 2, Joel's actions seem monstrously careless. He not only doomed mankind's future, but killed dozens of lives, and took the life of the only man who could ever engineer a cure, which directly resulted in his demise 4 years later. Yet, in the final flashback of Part 2, Joel proudly tells Ellie he would do it all over again. How could someone so vehemently defend their villainous actions, and refuse to show even the slightest bit of remorse for the lives they've doomed? It took a while for me to understand it, but because of that moment, on my second playthrough, I saw Joel in a completely new light. Joel's most important discovery over the course of the first game is understanding that if Ellie dies, the hope for future generations will die with her. Because even if there was a cure, would things really change for the better? This is a ruthless world, filled with a never-ending supply of heartless assholes, selfishly pushing down everyone and anyone who threatens their ego and sense of security. Think back to Bill, a man so driven to extreme isolation that he rigged a whole town with explosive traps. Or David, who had the gumption to earn the trust of a little girl just so he could then hunt her down for his community's next meal. The face of humanity is arguably uglier than the infected it's faced with, and Joel knows this. And because Joel knows this, he knows that the cure may stop the infected, but it will never fix the true ugliness at the heart of mankind. To Joel, there's no going back. Humanity must live with what it's done. But by saving Ellie, by allowing her to make the most of her gifts, both to inspire and change the lives of others, Ellie can contribute to a genuinely better future. It is her generation that will change the world for the better. Thus, The Last of Us does not mean the last of mankind. The Last of Us is the last generation to fail mankind. Ellie's generation will be the first of us to ascend. Or will it? That becomes the struggle of the almost entirely young cast of characters in the second game. All of these people, Jesse, Owen, Dina, Mel, Manny, Abby, and Ellie, have never known a world without the infected. They've seemingly been conditioned into accepting violence and clan mentality as everyday norms, understanding them as necessary aspects of life in post-apocalyptic society. Despite the goodness and kinship these young people are capable of, as we see both in Jackson and in the Wolf Stadium, they're only capable of playing out the cycles of violence that was handed down to them by their elders, by Joel's generation. In many ways, they've only been handed the failures of previous generations, and find no resolve to end the patterns of those failures. Empathy, compassion, and compromise are not values they've inherited, and the whole world will be worse off for it. But that doesn't mean there aren't those who've tried to stop that trend. Both Joel and Abby's father, Jerry, lived their last days lovingly, being examples of everything their generation has not been to the young. Maybe through their examples, they can plant the seeds of love they hope to see in the world and create lasting change. The power and importance of The Last of Us Part 2 is seeing how Ellie and Abby learn from those examples. Driven by anger and unrest, both Ellie and Abby adopt the cold brutality this world has inundated them with. Ellie particularly starts to walk in the footsteps of the broken man Joel was when she first met him, and by the end of the game, she's practically walked a mile in his shoes, lived through so many of his mistakes. Yet, in so many moments in both the journeys of Ellie and Abby, they can never quite outlive the examples of love in their lives. It's a confusing, messy, and sometimes traumatic contradiction they grapple with, and the actions born out of that confusion ends up costing them much of their identities and their happiness. But ultimately, the loving examples in their lives become more powerful than the darkness around them, a reassuringly hopeful assertion in a game so rife with human vice. And though this doesn't seem like it should apply to Ellie, I think there are glimmers of hope in the game's ending that suggests otherwise. Ellie's confused, obsessive ends may have cost her everything, but not the love Joel showed her. When she walks away from the farm, away from Joel's guitar in the last shot of the game, I believe she's going out into the world to find her redemption. She's finally going to fulfill her purpose as an example of empathy and change in a dark world, a promise so great that it can't be played like all the other promises on Joel's guitar. Of course, getting there is going to be a journey unto itself, but that's probably what The Last of Us Part 3 will be for. With all of that being said, everything being said, I believe Neil Druckmann, Hallie Gross, and Naughty Dog wanted to tell the story in the way they told it because they want us to think about what we're doing to change tomorrow. How can we act not out of anger or aggression, but with empathy and compassion to make a truly better world? For the older generation, who've lived their whole lifetime in the 7 years since they played the first game, it's the responsibility of being a positive example for the young. For the younger generation, who probably grew up watching a playthrough of The Last of Us on YouTube, it's the exasperating responsibility of inheriting the problems previous generations have handed down to us. Racial inequality, economic disparity, women's rights, mental health, and the never-ending battle against apathy and ignorance. Personally, there's no single piece of art or media that has more effectively captured what the sheer horror of becoming an adult in the 21st century feels like better than The Last of Us Part 2. But alternatively, because of the game's honesty towards this waking anxiety, few pieces of art have left me more assured that there is a way and that I do have a purpose. That no matter how confused I may be, no matter what venomous obsession clouds my thoughts like moths swarming a flame, or how many mistakes I make, I can always try again. That is the unmistakable humanity of The Last of Us Part 2.
I know. I know it's a fucking mess. I know. But we can choose to be happy. Happy. We're allowed to be happy.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. This was 2 months in the making, largely because making this video was a battle for my free time between working full-time hours at work, trying to manage a short film project with my friends that ultimately got canned. But yeah, making this video took a while, and I'm sorry for that. And additionally, I'm sorry if for many of those who have subscribed here over the last several months because of my Clone Wars videos, that this may have not been the video that you were hoping for or expecting to see next, or this was not a video for you. Sorry if you fall into that crowd. But if this was the video for you, hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, I'm sorry once again. But at the end of the day, no matter what we do on this channel, my goal is always to share my thoughts and express how I feel about the things that I love, and hopefully connect to other people through the very act of doing that. And I had to do that with this game. This is one of my favorite games of the year so far. There's still several games to come that I'm looking forward to hopefully talking about on this channel, but for now, we're going to step away from The Last of Us Part 2 and get back to some things that I'm sure many of you were looking forward to in the last few months, including a video about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I have an awesome video in the works for that very soon. Star Wars Rebels, which I'm going to be starting my rewatch of very soon, and some other projects as well for films here and there that I want to talk about on the channel. So please stay tuned, please stay subscribed if you enjoyed the quality of this video. It means a lot. We're still focusing on growth here and trying to rack in as many new fans of the channel as possible. So appreciate you guys, and I hope to see you on the next upload. Thank you everyone once again. Have a good time, evening, day, morning, whatever it is, wherever you're at. Thank you for watching one last time. Peace out, everybody.
No more to roam. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going.